The training compound lay buried deep in the mountains, concrete and steel swallowed by fog at dawn. Boots hammered against the parade ground, the rhythm of discipline echoing like war drums. Commands barked through the morning air. Every soldier's breath turned to smoke in the cold. And then she appeared. A woman, tall but lean, stepped into the open. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense knot, her eyes dark and unreadable. But it was the scar across her face, a harsh line that cut from cheek to jaw, that drew every gaze. In that instant, silence rippled across the crowd, only to be broken by laughter. "Looks like the medics sent us their leftover patient," someone jeered. Another voice rose, louder. "What is she even doing here? This isn't a hospital ward. This is war." The laughter spread, sharp and merciless. Soldiers nudged each other, smirks curling on their lips. A few mimicked a limp she didn't have. Others muttered that she wouldn't last a week. She said nothing. The silence she carried was heavier than any insult. Her gaze drifted over them, calm, almost detached, as though their words couldn't pierce whatever shield she had built inside. The drill sergeant stepped forward, squinting at her. "Name?" Her reply came flat, clipped, without hesitation. "Lena." The way she spoke it, curt, unadorned, stripped the name of softness. It felt like a command. Yet the crowd twisted it into a joke. "Lena the loser," someone muttered. "Lena the scar," another snorted. A ripple of chuckles coursed through the formation. I remember watching her in that moment. I remember thinking, how much can one person endure in silence? And I wonder now, have you ever been in her place? Have you ever stood alone, mocked for something you never chose, something written on your body or carved into your past? Because she stood there without flinching. No plea, no protest. Just the faint tightening of her jaw, the kind of tension only visible when you looked closely, as if she were swallowing fire to keep it hidden. Behind the ridicule, behind the humiliation, the air itself seemed to wait. Something unspoken trembled in the quiet between their laughter. And I felt it even then. This story wasn't going to end the way they thought. Because every scar carries a history. Every silence hides a truth. And the question that lingered over that training ground, sharp as a blade, was this: but why had someone like her, someone with scars, with silence, with shadows in her eyes, been sent here of all places? Morning drills were merciless. Rows of soldiers sprinted, crawled, and hauled themselves over obstacles as instructors roared. Lena moved with them, silent, steady, but slower than the rest. Every stumble became a target. "Keep up, Scarface," one shouted. "Don't trip, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you breaking that pretty jaw again." Laughter followed her like a shadow. Sweat slicked her temples, her breath harsh, yet she never retaliated. She absorbed their cruelty like stone absorbs rain, quiet, unyielding, giving nothing back. I remember one particular day. Mud slicked the training course and the recruits were ordered to crawl beneath barbed wire. The men beside her slithered through with practiced ease. Lena's uniform tore against the metal, mud streaked across her face, and still the jeers came. "She's deadweight. We'll be carrying her body bag on the first mission." Even the instructors didn't silence the mockery. They let it bleed through the ranks, as if testing whether she'd crack. She didn't. She pushed forward, jaw clenched, her silence cutting sharper than any retort. And yet, I saw the loneliness etched in her posture, the way she kept a step apart from the others, as though her presence itself was an intrusion. But no one knew the truth. No one asked what that scar meant. No one wondered where she had come from. They only saw weakness where there was none. No one knew that humiliation was sharpening her, not breaking her. But no one knew. It was a small thing at first. During weapons assembly, recruits fumbled with pieces of steel, rushing to beat the timer. Fingers slipped, bolts clattered to the floor. Lena sat at the edge of the table. Her hands moved with quiet precision, swift, efficient, almost surgical. In less than half the allotted time, her rifle was fully assembled, checked, and resting on the table. She didn't announce it. She simply folded her hands, waiting. The others noticed. The laughter faltered. "Beginner's luck," one muttered. But when the drill repeated the next day, she did it again. Faster, cleaner. Each click of metal under her fingers spoke of years of practice. And then there was the night exercise. The recruits were blindfolded, ordered to navigate through the woods with only a compass and a map. Most wandered off course, circling back in confusion. Lena, silent as always, disappeared into the trees. She returned first, mud streaking her boots, compass in hand, eyes sharp as though she'd walked those woods 100 times before. Still, no one connected the dots. They muttered excuses. She memorized the route. She got lucky. But luck doesn't leave footprints lighter than air. Luck doesn't guide you through darkness, as if it were second nature. The signs were there. The scar on her face wasn't just a wound. It was a story untold. The silence she carried wasn't weakness. It was discipline. Her stillness was not emptiness, it was waiting. And then came the moment that changed everything. During a live-fire drill, one of the recruits panicked. His rifle jammed, and in his frantic tug, he almost fired into the line. Shouts erupted. Chaos flared. Lena moved before anyone else. Her hand struck the rifle aside with perfect control, fingers dancing across the mechanism. In seconds, the jam cleared. She shoved the weapon back into his chest, eyes flashing with something that silenced even the instructors. The recruit stammered. The others stared. For the first time since she arrived, no one laughed. Because in that small, precise moment, they glimpsed something terrifying and undeniable. And it was then that one small detail made the entire unit fall silent. The silence that followed her intervention lingered long after the drill ended. For the first time, the recruits didn't know what to say. The same mouths that had mocked her now chewed on doubt. The scar on her face no longer looked like weakness, it looked like survival. In the days that followed, subtle shifts began to appear. During marksmanship training, Lena stood at the far end of the line, her rifle steady. One by one, targets fell with surgical precision. The others fired, missed, cursed. Lena fired, hit, lowered her weapon, and waited. Not a single wasted bullet. The instructors exchanged glances, quiet murmurs slipping through. But Lena never sought their praise. She walked off the range without expression, as though it were nothing more than routine. And that was the strange thing. Her skill wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It revealed itself like a shadow creeping across the ground, undeniable only when it had already covered you. I watched her one evening after training. She sat alone, the sunset bleeding red across the compound walls. Her scar caught the light like a blade's edge. I thought about how scars are stories, etched into flesh, permanent records of pain and survival. And I wondered, what kind of past could forge this silence? Have you ever met someone who carried an aura that unsettled you, not because they were violent, but because you sensed they could be if they chose? That was Lena. The recruits began to whisper. They called her strange. They called her ghost-like. But not one of them dared laugh in her face again. Hope crept in like dawn. The turning point came during tactical drills. A simulated hostage rescue, chaos staged in a labyrinth of dark corridors. The team stumbled, shouts, confusion, poor coordination. And then Lena stepped forward. Her voice, low but commanding, cut through the noise. You, cover the hallway. You, with me. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And somehow they obeyed. She moved like she had done it before, not like a recruit, but like someone who had lived inside rooms where every second meant life or death. Corners cleared, doors breached, targets downed. The mock hostage pulled to safety. When the exercise ended, the instructors didn't shout. They didn't need to. Everyone in that building had felt it. The shift in power, the rebalancing of respect. For the first time, the soldiers looked at her not with contempt, but with an uneasy acknowledgement. And yet, she remained silent. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply adjusted her gear, eyes distant, as though already preparing for something greater. But there was still a storm coming. Because the final trial loomed, the test that broke most recruits. The trial where accidents turned fatal, where reputation shattered, and only the strongest endured. And no one yet knew the full measure of the scarred woman who spoke so little. No one knew what Lena would unleash when the true crucible began. But they would. They would, when the last trial began. The final trial began under a sky the color of gunmetal, clouds packed tight as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Recruits filed onto the gravel, faces painted, gear rattling, rifles checked twice, and still not enough. The briefing was simple on paper and murderous in practice. Infiltrate the abandoned cement plant in Blackwater Ravine, locate a downed pilot, extract before the red team bucks them in. Volkit, Simonition, Nightfall Exfil, Corporal Rig, not fastest in the unit, laugh like a broken bottle, was designated point. He led the chorus against Lena from day one. When the instructors handed him the map, he smirked across the ranks until his eyes found her. Try to keep up, Scar. Or keep out of the way. No one laughed aloud this time. Not after the weeks that had reshaped the temperature of the barracks. But the old habit hung in the air like static. Rig turned, lifted his fist, and the column moved down the fire road, into the timber, into the cold smell of wet bark and damp earth. They descended in silence broken only by breath, by harness buckles, by the hush of fabric against branches. Rig chose speed over caution. He pushed them hard along a creek choked with slick stones. Twice he stumbled. Twice he hissed at the soldier behind him for crowding. Lena stayed third from the rear, letting the line bob and jerk without adding friction. Her eyes moved more than her feet, reading tree lines, listening to the language of wind. A faint chemical tang skinned the air. Solvent. Fresh. Wrong. At the ravine lip, the old plant loomed, a skeleton of girders and concrete silos, windows yawning black. The red team had cut floodlights into the structures. Motion sensors dotted the yard like fireflies trapped in amber. Rig signaled a straight-line approach. Lena watched his hand slap instructions, aggressive, simple, loud in their simplicity. He sent 2 to the right, 2 to the left, and started down the slope himself. The first shot cracked like a whip. Sim round, but at this distance it stung like anger. Sparks skittered off a rusted pipe near Rig's shoulder. 3 more shots followed from the catwalks. The unit scattered, hearts hammering. Rig yelled, move, move, and took them straight across open gravel into a crossfire he'd never seen because he hadn't stopped to look. 2 recruits dropped into cover behind a toppled drum. One yelped as a sim round tattooed his thigh. The comms clogged with half-formed orders, apologies, expletives. Red lasers combed the yard, blinking when they found bodies. The plant swallowed their panic and echoed it back tenfold. Lena reached Rig as he slapped a mag, eyes wild. She didn't push him aside. She didn't ask permission. Her hand lifted, palms slicing the air with a set of gestures that didn't belong to recruits. 2 fingers. Hook left. Displace fire. Cut the angle. Her other hand threw a smoke, low, clean, with the backspin of habit, and the canister hissed a gray curtain into being. The unit didn't question her. Whether because the smoke gave them space to think, or because they'd already begun to believe, they moved when she moved. She split them into pairs and drew a line through the smoke that was more geometry than courage, slipping through the open yard on a diagonal that turned Red's firing lanes into blind guesses. Sim rounds sailed wide. The catwalk shooters tried to lead targets and found ghosts instead. They reached the shadow of the conveyor supports, pressed close enough to hear bolts cooling in metal. Lena listened past the gunfire. The chemical tang was stronger here and braided into it, something sharper, coppery. Not blood. Not in a sim drill. Tripwire. She dropped to one knee, fingers hovering over gravel without touching. The wire was hair-fine, coated, stretched from the base of a column to a crate of scrap. Not Red's work. Too disciplined. Too quiet. Her light grazed the crate seam, a slit, more recent than the rust around it. Inside, nested like a snake in leaves, sat a device with hand-soldered guts and mean intent. Not enough explosive to level the yard, but plenty to tear a person apart. She didn't say IED. She didn't shout stop. Sound invited attention, and attention invited fire. Instead, she reached into her pouch and produced a flat strip of ceramic and a curved clip, tools too professional to live in a recruit's kit. Her breathing slowed until the fight sounds blurred. Thumb and forefinger traced the wire to its anchor, found the sequence, mapped the current with a mental muscle honed far from training grounds. On me, Rig whispered, a little too loud, leaning to see what she saw. Her hand snapped up without looking, palm a blade that froze him mid-breath. She cut the loop with a pressure kiss of ceramic. The world didn't end. Her other hand blocked the percussion cap with the curved clip. 2 seconds later, the device was a pile of confused parts, a puzzle with its picture shredded. Rig stared. He had a question on his tongue and no language left to ask it. "Who put that there?" One of the pairs hissed over comms. "That's not Sim." From the plant's second floor, Red's fire surged as if sensing their chance slipping away. The unit jolted forward, minds jerked back to the objective. Lena moved with them, stepping around the dead wire like it still had fangs. The smoke thinned, with it their protection. She led them under the spine of the conveyor and up a maintenance stair that groaned under their weight. A burst hammered the wall inches from her head, a red team rifle sweeper with better position than ethics. She felt concrete dust spray her neck, tasted lime and old ruin. She slid along the railing and rolled into the mouth of the second floor. A shooter leaned from a doorframe, lasers skittering bright. She saw the whole problem in a single breath. He held their path and their timing. She snapped her rifle and stitched 3 Sim rounds into the sensor squares at his chest. Tap, tap, tap. The vest screamed and died. He rattled backward, surprised into truth. Her team fled past, momentum rediscovered. Hallways smelled of rot and oil. The objective room was an office with glass walls filmed in grime, a desk overturned to make a bad barricade. The pilot sat zip-tied, hooded, torso strapped with a training harness wired to paint anyone who botched the defuse with shame. The red team had layered it with extra. "Lovely." 2 on the door, Lena said, first words in minutes, tone level and made of steel. "Cover down the hall." Rig put his rifle to the hallway and tried not to look at her hands as she knelt by the vest. The harness bristled with decoys and spring-loaded cruel jokes. She didn't strip her gloves. She didn't need naked fingertips. She needed memory. Her mind narrowed until the world tunneled down to plastic and wire, to numbers she could feel in the dark. 15 seconds between pulses, blue loop not a loop, copper taste inside the time she had left. Outside the room, the fight shifted. Red team reinforcements scrambled up the stairwell, boots loud, voices louder, working to stitch a noose at the choke. The unit's outer pair fell back 2 steps under pressure. Rig barked something and shouldered a corner, muzzle steady now, because some part of him understood he had finally reached a place where jokes could not live. On the floor, a single bead of sweat slid from Lena's hairline and vanished into the ridge where her scar curved. She cut the right wire, not the right-looking wire. The vest side, electronics losing purpose. Pilot safe. Doorway under control. Corridor still bad. "Move," she said. They moved. The pilot went on Rig's shoulder. The team compressed into a living knot that knew how to bend but not break. Down the maintenance stair again, into the raw mouth of the yard, back to the smoke that had thinned to ghosts of itself. Red team fire turned savage, frustrated. One of their shots found a recruit's bicep and fed him a welt that would sting for days. He gritted his teeth, and the world kept going. On the yard's far edge, a forklift lay on its side like a fallen animal, surrounded by the messy sprawl of chain, cable, and steel sheet. Lena pointed. The team sprinted, huddled behind the metal carcass. Red shooters repositioned above. Their angles improved. The noose came down in light. Last stretch, Rig panted, voice throttled by the pilot's weight and the truth he hadn't wanted. "We need a break, a window." Lena didn't answer. She listened instead to the gaps between shots, the rhythm of reloads, the half-second where a breath must be taken no matter how ruthless the shooter. She saw a different option. "Give me 2 seconds of silence," she said, eyes on Rig, on the whole knot of them, hands asking for trust and certainty both. For the first time since any of them had met her, they gave her their silence willingly. Her hand rose with a small metal sphere, the last smoke, but modified. She had swapped its core hours ago, working alone in the mess hall with a multi-tool that wasn't standard issue. She lobbed it high. It arced, rolled on the catwalk, and bloomed not gray but white, bright and violent, a magnesium flare that ate at shadow. The catwalk shooters flinched and turned their faces, a reflex older than training. In that blink Lena stood, raised her rifle, and placed rounds on 3 sensors that would have required prayer in normal light. Their vests streaked down in sequence. The yard went from cut with lasers to almost calm. They ran. At the ravine lip, freedom still sat on the far side of bad decisions. Red Team had thrown a net across the tree line, a squad hidden in brush just where a desperate unit would rush. Lena halted them with a fist. She turned her head just enough for Rig to see her eyes. The old arrogance in his face had burned into something stripped and spare. The pilot groaned on his shoulder. The unit's lungs were on fire. Lena pointed to the wash of boulders upstream. It looked like punishment, not path. She slid over rocks slick with spray, boots barely kissing water, using the stones' wet backs as cover and route both. The unit followed, copying balance they hadn't trained, finding a rhythm that belonged to cliffs and not to parade grounds. When the Red Squad stood to shoot where the path laid itself like a trap, they found nothing. When they pivoted, the unit was already at their flank, already past, already gone. A final ridge rose, the lip between trial and night. A sting of wind cut across it, the kind of wind that travels a long way to tell a secret. From the ridge's highest tooth, a single red shooter lay prone, patient, glass to his eye, muzzle just over rock. His angle would walk bullets into the team one by one as they crossed the skyline. Sim rounds, yes, but pain, humiliation, failure all the same. Lena slid her pack down and pulled free a DMR the cadre had issued for the scenario, but no one had expected to matter. She laid belly to stone, felt the cold through her plate, set her cheek, found the sight. Wind shoved at her. Range and drop lived in the angle of grass against rock, in the weight of cloud, in the muscle memory that no drill could fake. She exhaled until her body nearly forgot to breathe. The red shooter's shoulder rolled at the top of his inhale. She touched the trigger like she was finishing a sentence. The round kissed the sensor square on his vest. The vest screamed. He lifted his head, startled not by pain but by being seen. The ridge belonged to them. They crossed in a low run, the pilot's boots dragging ruts in the dirt. Trees swallowed them. Once the forest took them in, it held them, and it wasn't long before the boundary flags broke the brush, limp and sun-faded and beautiful. The cadre waited beyond, helmets tilted, clipboards dead in their hands. The exercise timer was still counting on a wrist somewhere, but time had stopped meaning anything 4 minutes ago. The unit spilled into the open and locked into a formation without being told. The pilot slid off Rig's shoulder and found his own feet. The instructors stepped forward and halted. The head instructor's eyes snagged on a ceramic strip tucked like a bookmark into Lena's pouch, on the modified smoke canister clipped to her vest, on the stillness that comes when adrenaline surrenders to focus instead of fear. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The story wrote itself across the yard, the ambush avoided, the live device defused, the shooters cut from their perches, the pilot extracted down a path no one else would have chosen. The unit's chests heaved. Their mouths stayed closed. What could they even name, standing in front of a person who had turned chaos into geometry? Rig's gaze found hers and didn't know where to land. Whatever he decided she was on day one had been drowned, stripped, burned away, and scattered in the ravine wind. His lips parted. No joke emerged. Just breath. Someone behind the cadre, a comms Tech 2 junior to understand the value of silence, blurted without thinking. "Sir, she used EOD protocol. Not our standard book." The head instructor's jaw flexed once. A brief, almost smile ghosted the corner of his mouth and vanished. So she did. Lena didn't speak. She didn't salute. She stood with her rifle slung and her eyes on the far ridgeline, as if she were still reading wind. The scar on her face had lost its violence. In the dusk light it looked like a map, one that led straight to here. In the hush, a name traveled across the yard like a rumor trying not to be one. A whisper from an instructor to another, an offhand code spoken by someone who had been in rooms where lists were read and missions didn't exist. Ibis. It had the taste of a call sign. It had the weight of a life lived in the quiet hinge where bad things either happen or don't. The unit didn't hear the word clearly. They didn't need to. They had seen enough. Back at the starting line, helmets hung from fingers instead of heads. Training vests creaked. Dust lifted and settled. The mountain finally exhaled. The silence was no longer heavy. It was respectful. Inside it, everything unspoken stood tall. After action would come. Debriefs would unspool. Checkmarks would flower on forms. But none of that could touch the moment now, the shape it had carved in every person who had watched. On day one, they had mocked a scar. By the end of the trial, they had followed that scar through fire and smoke and shadow, and it had walked them home. And somewhere in the weave of the unit's stunned quiet, an understanding clicked into place with the finality of a magazine seating home. After this moment, who would dare call her weak? Suggested cinematic image, dynamic action shot of Lena mid-run through white flare smoke, motion blur on her and the team, a searing shaft of light cutting through the yard as catwalk silhouettes fade into brightness. The compound was still when they returned. Helmets hung loose in tired hands, boots scuffed the gravel, but no one spoke. The silence was no longer the silence of ridicule. It was the silence that comes when words are too small to name what has been witnessed. Rig was the first to break. He stopped at the gate, turned toward Lena. For a moment, his mouth opened, ready to fire off some old reflex of mockery. But nothing came. His eyes met hers, and all the arrogance bled away. What stood there was not the scar he had mocked. It was the soldier who had carried them through the fire. Slowly, awkwardly, he straightened his spine. His hand rose in a salute, sharp and deliberate. No one had ordered it. No one expected it. But it cut through the yard like thunder. One by one, the others followed. Salutes snapped into place. Not mockery, not obligation. Recognition. Respect. The instructors said nothing. They didn't need to. Their eyes alone revealed what they knew. Lena had been forged elsewhere, in places no training ground could imitate. She wasn't a recruit stumbling toward competence. She was something else entirely. I remember watching her face in that moment. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She only nodded, as if accepting not their apology, not their admiration, but their acknowledgement of truth. And have you ever witnessed that shift? Have you seen the instant when contempt becomes respect, when laughter dies in the throat and is replaced by awe? It's a rare thing. It changes not just the one who earns it, but everyone who gives it. The scar on her face caught the last gold light of evening. What once seemed like a wound now looked like a badge. Her silence was no longer emptiness, it was command unspoken. Later, in the barracks, rumors spread of a name whispered by the cadre, a code, a call sign, a shadow identity buried in classified files. But even without the whispers, the truth had already taken root. She was no longer Lena the Scar. She was Lena, the soldier who led them through chaos and brought them back alive. And that image, her standing alone yet no longer isolated, their salutes raised toward her, burned itself into memory. A moment when shame became reverence. Because after everything, one question remained. Do you want to know what happened once all the truths were finally revealed? We have all seen it happen, someone judged by their scars, their silence, their difference. Someone dismissed before they've even been given a chance to speak. And yet, when truth reveals itself, the very same voices that mocked are forced to bow their heads in respect. Lena's story isn't just about one soldier. It's about us. About every time we've misjudged someone sitting beside us, every time we've underestimated the quiet, every time we've mistaken stillness for weakness. So let me ask you, have you ever seen someone underestimated only to rise beyond anyone's imagination? Have you ever been that person yourself? Because the truth is, we all carry scars. Some on our skin, some hidden deeper. And like Lena, those scars don't make us weak, they make us undeniable. We together know this feeling. We've all stood in the shadows at some point, waiting for the moment to prove we belong. If this story spoke to you, Stay with us. Share it, like it, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments, whose story of hidden strength have you witnessed? Because in the end, we are all more than what the world first sees.